Welcome to the Unity of Olympia podcast.
Well, what would happen if our head and our heart switched places? If someone suggested something new, we'd say, "Great idea, let me feel about it." Albert Einstein would have said, "We cannot solve our problems with the same love as when we created them." For math problems, if someone said, "What's the square root of 4,227? We'd say, "It's easy, it's love." For our spiritual growth, we would practice heartfulness meditation. And doctors would recommend heart training to keep us loving as we age. So, our brains and our thinking are not bad or wrong by any stretch of the imagination. I don't know about you, but I need this, and I'm guessing you probably do too. And there are times my brain likes to overperform. And I get really wrapped up, and maybe you have the same experience, you don't have to share if you do. Sometimes I get really wrapped up in thinking, and when I make a mistake, not if, but when, because it happens, I might get really hard on myself. I might think exasperated thoughts, like, how could I do that? Or I might call myself names if I'm having a really bad day. Or I might have regret thinking, oh, if only I had done X. And I don't know about you, but sometimes too, I have that should thinking. Or sometimes it's shouldn't thinking. I'm a Unity Truth student. I shouldn't think that. I shouldn't feel that way. I shouldn't say things like that. All right, so like I said, maybe you relate. If you don't, I want to learn from you. If you do, like I said, you don't have to admit it. I have been studying a practice that I believe is an antidote to perfectionism and to self-recrimination. And this antidote is something called mindful self-compassion. And that's what I want to talk about today. Share some of my journey with this practice, and I'm still practicing, so you know that famous saying, practice makes progress. Maybe you thought I was going to say another word. So as we practice, we learn and grow. And if you don't have those same issues of being hard on yourself, that's great. Mindful self-compassion can also be a great tool when we see stuff in the world that we don't like or that we feel uncomfortable about. I don't know if anyone else has this experience. Sometimes I have opinions about how other people drive their cars. Sometimes I have opinions about some political leanings some friends and family have. Okay? And so mindful self-compassion is a great practice that can help us extend that divine love to ourselves. And I believe this practice also really aligns with Unity teachings. But first I'll talk about what mindful self-compassion is, how it benefits us, and then in our meditation we'll get a little chance to practice if you want, because you know everything is voluntary. So mindful self-compassion is described as being our own inner ally, treating ourselves the way we would treat a friend who's having a hard time, even if your friend blew it, or was feeling really inadequate, or was just undergoing some kind of human suffering. So, if we haven't been formally introduced, my name is Audrey Pitchford. I am honored to be your licensed Unity teacher. And as a licensed Unity teacher, I always tell people this means I went to a bunch of school, I started with a bunch of questions, I ended with a bunch more questions, and not always all the answers. And I know what I think. I always like to hear what you think, so I tend to ask you questions that don't have like a right or wrong answer, because I want to know what you think, and we don't all have to see it the same way. That's totally good. So if we think about mindful self-compassion as treating ourselves the way we would treat a friend who blew it or who was going through a really hard time, this is where I invite you to share. What do you do if you have a friend who's really struggling, or who feels like they made a huge mistake, or is just going through some profound suffering? Maybe they lost a family member, maybe a close friendship ended. How do you treat your friend in that instance?
Comfort them.
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey. Comfort them. I saw someone else over here.
Or just be with them.
Just be with them. Just spend time with them. Let them know that they're not alone. Yeah.
Listen, a hug.
Listen. Give them a hug. Yeah. Yeah.
Ask what they need.
Ask what they need. Ooh, these are magic words. Thank you, Betty. Yeah. And so we can do all of these and more with ourselves, and we'll get into the details of how we practice that mindful self-compassion coming up shortly. First, I wanted to say, though, that there's actually scientific benefits of mindful self-compassion. Mindful self-compassion has been around as a practice, named that way, maybe about 20, 25 years. It's probably been around before that. But some studies of mindful self-compassion show that it helps us have greater life happiness, greater satisfaction, and it builds resiliency. It's something that helps us navigate life's ups and downs, because sometimes things are going great, and then sometimes things might go off the rails a little bit. And so as we practice mindful self-compassion, we can build that resiliency that helps us navigate the ups and downs of life. I also believe mindful self-compassion is a way of honoring our divinity and the divinity of all. So if we think about our friend who's having a tough time, and we're giving them a hug, and we're being with them, and we're comforting them, and we're listening to them, we're honoring their divinity. We're honoring their divinity. And when we do the same for ourselves, we're honoring our own divinity. We're honoring that divinity within. Because if you were introduced to someone and you were told this person is an expression of the divine, you would listen to them, you would be kind to them, and that person is within. That person is each of us. So we can always use that practice to honor that divinity that we know that we are and that everyone else is as well. So this gets into the steps for mindful self-compassion and the unity teachings. There's 3 basic steps that we're going to talk about today, and then we're going to get a chance, like I said, to practice them. So the first step in mindful self-compassion is mindfulness. Mindfulness. And mindfulness is sometimes described as being fully present to our experiences without judging them. Being fully present to our feelings, the circumstances of our life, experiencing them, noticing them, honoring them, and not judging them. So, back to you. I'm guessing a few people in this room know some stuff about mindfulness. What do you do that helps you practice mindfulness in your life?
Breathe.
Breathe, yes. I love it from the yoga teacher. Yes, let us just breathe. It seems like such an obvious thing. Aren't we breathing all the time? But sometimes we're doing that really shallow breathing. And so, yeah, taking in a full body breath helps bring us back to that present moment. Thank you, Jean.
Name what you're focusing on in your head.
Name what I'm focusing on in my head. Yeah, thank you, Terry. I really like that. And sometimes if what we're trying to name is our emotions, if we find we don't have a very rich vocabulary of emotions, there's some great images online called the feelings wheel, where you can go look at like a circle that has a bunch of different feelings words and pick the one or the ones that resonate. I really like Thich Nhat Hanh, who advocates for saying things like, instead of I am angry, he advocates for saying, I have anger in me. I have sadness in me. I have joy in me. I have frustration in me. I have disappointment in me. I have worry in me, I have fear in me. How's that different? How's that different than just saying, I am?
It's not defining you.
Right. It's not defining me. It's helping me remember the I am of who I am is greater than any experience of anger, frustration, sadness, worry, doubt. Great, thank you, Jerry.
It can change.
It can change, yes. Those emotions come and go. Right. Yeah, so all of this can help us practice mindfulness, breathing, naming our emotions, affirming.
I walk
And walks, yes. And where do you walk here?
through the forest.
Nice. Thank you. Yeah, so another great practice of mindfulness, and this is a twofer. Moving our bodies can help us get recentered in the present moment, and being out in nature. And then we're probably breathing also, like Keith said. So maybe it's a threefer. Okay, yeah. Other practices that help with mindfulness.
Just having a time out from whatever, just sitting and reflecting.
Having a time out, sitting and reflecting. Sometimes that's called meditation. And if we're around friends who, maybe use other language, we can just call it a time out, right? I'm having my spiritual time out. So yeah, taking time, sitting in silence, allowing ourselves just to be, letting go of the doing. These are all great practices for mindfulness. All right. So in Unity, we know that prayer and meditation are very important. There are 4 basic principles that we rely on prayer and meditation to remind us of that divinity within, that sacred nature that is in each of us and in each person. And so I love that mindful self-compassion connects to one of the practices that has been happening within Unity for decades and over 100 years. And I also really like the idea of mindfulness helping us just notice what's going on without judging it. Those emotions, I have fear in me, I have anger in me, I have disappointment in me. Last weekend I was back in Unity Village for a licensed Unity teacher retreat. And our guest speaker, Martha Creek, talked about accepting our parts. The part of me that might feel frustrated. The part of me that has a belief that other people should drive differently than they happen to be driving on my way to Sunday service in the morning. The part of me that's confused about some political opinions my loved ones express. The part of me that wishes there were not wars and climate change and starvation happening on our planet. Martha Creek talks about accepting all these parts, and to accept them, we have to acknowledge that they're there. We have to look at them. And she calls them our parts. I call them my partners, my partners in life. I think about participating in partnership with my parts. So again, first step of mindful self-compassion, that focus on mindfulness. Let's go to the second step of mindful self-compassion, seeing common humanity. Seeing common humanity. We live in a world that's a little bit us and them. We do it this way, but everybody else does it that way. And it can be really easy at times to get into separation thinking. To think, I'm all by myself here. I'm the only one, I don't know if anyone else says this, I'm the only one, victim thinking, who's ever had this problem in the history of time. Friends, there are 8.2 billion people on this planet. Statistically, the likelihood that any of us is facing something that nobody else is facing is probably pretty low. Even if it's true that we are facing a situation that no one else has faced, our common humanity shows us that we have shared emotions, that we've all experienced things like anger, sadness, fear, joy, elation, disappointment. And so when we are struggling, or when we're judging ourselves for maybe doing something that we wish we hadn't done, we can think about common humanity. Recognize, okay, other people struggle with this too. I know other people struggle to watch painful stories on the news. I know other people sometimes lose their temper or their patience. I know other people sometimes have frustration with drivers on the road, and maybe the one they're frustrated with is me. As we think about this common humanity, this is another tool that helps us develop mindful self-compassion for ourselves. All right, so common humanity connects to Unity's basic principles in that Unity teaches oneness. We have two basic principles that start us out. The first principle, that God is all good everywhere present, and that means in each of us, there's no spot where God is not, including other drivers on the road, including people who might vote differently than I vote, including in parts of the world where there's conflict happening or where people are starving. There's no spot where God is not. And we remember too the second principle, that because the divine is in each, because the divine is everywhere, the divine is in each of us, in each person. And I think this helps us remember our common humanity and our common divinity, recognizing that we each are leading human lives where we might experience joys, sorrows, painful moments, wonderful moments. And we all have that divine expression. We all have that part of us that's greater than our situation or circumstance. So, common humanity. All right, the third part for mindful self-compassion is the part about extending kindness to ourselves. Extending kindness to ourselves. Now, thinking back to what we did for our beloved friend who was struggling, or who was going through a hard time, or who maybe felt like they had messed up. There are times when we consciously can affirm and bless ourselves. We can say words of affirmation to ourselves. We can say words of comfort and peace to ourselves. This gets back to our third Unity basic principle. Thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. As we think, so we become. We co-creatively express divinity in the world and to ourselves as well. And that's how we can use the power of affirmations to say, I am resilient. I am beloved. I am loving. I am strength. I am joy. I am open and receptive to divine illumination, or whatever it is that we affirm for ourselves. This is also a way that we can use one of our 12 powers. So our Unity co-founder, Charles Fillmore, identified 12 attributes that he said were in the divine and therefore in each of us. I know in the month of October we talk about the power of zeal. I also really like the power of power. That's our ability to shift our consciousness. If I notice that I'm like, watching the news, noticing that I'm starting to not feel good, this is an opportunity for me to back up and say, okay, hey, what am I telling myself? Am I telling myself messages of hopelessness or overwhelm? And what do I want to tell myself instead? And using that divine power of power, which is not about power over others, it's about power over this, dominion over my own thoughts. And if I'm struggling to show myself kindness, then I can also reach out. Linda just gave a great example at the beginning of our service today, where she talked about that there's prayer available in the back of the sanctuary after every service. If I'm having trouble holding the high watch for myself, I can ask a friend to pray with me, to help me until I can get back on my feet in how I want to think. I can connect with others who I know will offer me kindness. And a technique that I sometimes use too, if I'm needing to show myself kindness, and it's maybe a time like 3 in the morning that I might not call someone just because I didn't want to wake them up, I can imagine kind words voices of my friends. I imagine someone who loves me dearly and how they would say to me what I need to hear. So, self-kindness, being kind to ourselves. All right. So we've talked about these three parts of mindful self-compassion: mindfulness, common humanity, and extending kindness to ourselves. And I believe also that these practices have a greater effect than simply being kind to ourselves. So when I started practicing mindful self-compassion and learning about it, I shared with a friend of mine that I feel like these practices are changing my brain. And she said, how so? And I said, well, I noticed that I'm calmer and having more compassion when I'm out in the world. That extending kindness here helped me extend kindness here. And so I really believe that mindful self-compassion is a practice that can help us put our unity beliefs into action. And remember, unity principle number 5 talks about it's not enough to just, believe unity ideas or think, oh, that was a nice message on a Sunday, and then go back to however else I was being the other 6 days of the week. That our basic principle number 5 is about living the truth we know, being the hearts and the hands of the divine out in the world. And so, I, as you can probably tell, am completely sold on this practice. If mindful self-compassion is new to you, like I said, I encourage you, when we have our meditation time today, to join in the practice. You don't have to do anything where you'll get out of your seat or do anything like that. You can do it completely sitting in your own chair within your own mind, so it's hopefully low risk. If you're interested in learning more, this book, Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook, is written for lay people with lots of exercises and journaling and so forth. If that's not your thing, that's okay. There's other ways to learn as well. And so after we have some special music, we'll have an opportunity to practice together those 3 steps: the mindfulness, the common humanity, and the self-love, the self-kindness. So.